to just get our questions out. So maybe whoever is ready to just give a little bit of feedback, and Jack is ready to go. Go, Jack.
Yes. Yeah. What I was going to ask Marilyn is this. Marilyn won't remember, literally, some 20 odd years ago at ARA, I asked Marilyn and Susan a question. Okay. And I'm returning to that question because I was fascinated by Marilyn's educational influence in the learning of her students and the learning of others. In other words, the educational influence. Now, Marilyn, on her slides, you'll see there's educational setting, there's educational practice, but there isn't that sense of educational influence. And what I'm just fascinated by is that evidence, and I had a tendency to ask this question at ARA of quite senior academics. Do you have any evidence that anything you've done has had an educational influence in the learning of your students or others? And that, if you like, is the question that I'm still with, having heard Marilyn's presentation.
I suppose, and I must say, Jack, I don't remember your question from 20 years ago at ARA. Although I do remember you being there at various things I've been a part of for many years. I think there are a lot of different ways to answer that question. All of us who are teachers and teacher educators can point to former students who have gone in their own right to create programs where they build context for teachers to engage in research and work with each other and show evidence of their children's learning, and have developed a variety of interesting ways to think about what kids learn and what is evidence of that learning. So, I mean, it's like, in that sense, it's like a parent. Well, look, here are my children and look what they're doing. So, I mean, that's one way I think that we know what we're doing. And one of my former students is here. Hi, Kirsten. So happy to see you.
Good to see you too.
So that's one kind of answer. I was just talking with Maureen during the breakout groups about what kind of evidence do we have, or can we ever have, to influence policy along these lines? And many of you know the important report, book on teacher education internationally that Linda Darling-Hammond and colleagues published a number of years ago. And one of the things that they found when they looked at the high-flying countries according to PISA scores, which we could all debate what's wrong with that construction, but we won't do that right now. One of the things they found was that in those high-flying countries, one feature was that there were opportunities and expectations for teachers to be engaged in research. And they learned how to do it in teacher education, and there was support for it in the schools. So, I mean, I think that's another kind of evidence that we might say, well, maybe this work has had an impact. I think we can also look at the teachers who engage in research with their students and with parents in their communities, and work in many ways for issues related to equity as the goal. So, I mean, I think there are all sorts of ways to answer that question. How do you know that your life has mattered in a way, is what you're asking. And partly you know it, I think, from your students who tell you what they're doing. I won't repeat myself. And there's a whole lot more to say, but I'll stop because someone else might have a question. But thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Jack. Kirsten, did you want to ask a question? Oh, you're muted.
Yep, thank you. That was ironic timing that question was asked, as I am a student of Dr. Cochran-Smith. And I was meeting with some amazing student teachers in the breakout room, and we were just talking about the tension between this idea of inquiry as stance versus inquiry as project or product, and talking about the potential necessary evil of it first needing to be inquiry as product or project in teacher ed, because of the fact that you're student teaching within higher education that has its own deadlines and bounds and grades, right? And I talked about my frustrations as a teacher educator, students' frustrations as students, of we want to view this as a stance and position this as a stance, but by the nature of doing it and you're student teaching in a class, it's positioned as a project. And so just curious if there's ways in which to try to either live in that tension or break that tension a bit.
You probably have to do both. But I think in initial teacher education, which is where I did the vast majority of my work over many, many years, the way student teachers get an idea about what we're talking about when we're talking about teacher research or inquiry is what happens in the program all the time, all around them. So in a discussion, in a course, is inquiry being supported and encouraged? And is it happening? And is it labeled? And are people being prompted to try to question their own assumptions, get beneath the surface of things they read, things they write, other people's ideas? So if all of that, and there's a whole lot more, but if all of that is emphasized to student teachers and young folks who are just beginning, this is part of inquiry. It's not just when you pose a specific question and gather some data and do some analysis to try to answer that question. It's what your stance is when you're sitting in a teacher's meeting and there's a discussion about a new textbook series that's going to be brought into your school. What kinds of questions do you ask? Do you engage in inquiry about that? I mean, Susan and I used to say any context in which people are brought together as educators can function from an inquiry stance. They don't often, but almost any context can. So I think it's partly, there's always going to be the tension, Kirsten, that you and the other people in your group were talking about.
Yeah.
But I think as teacher educators, we can go a long way toward helping people understand. It's not, this is the point I was trying to make earlier. It's not, okay, right now, you're a researcher. But all the rest of this over here is when you're a teacher. We have to help people see it's not like that. That when when you make inquiry a stance from which you work, you're always working from inquiry. And sometimes you're doing an inquiry project within that larger inquiry stance. But I don't think that idea just pops into people's heads. I think it takes a lot of demonstration and a lot of meta work about it with people.
Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you, Kirsten, for your great question.